2022 federal election is around the corner. In the next few months, the Prime Minister lurch. Mr Morrison will have to call a federal election. Currently he's lurching from disaster to disaster. I think it's important that we understand not only the process but also the type of candidates that they'll be standing, because there are some changes. They're not significant, but there are changes. Electoral politics is an expensive business, that's the first thing. For example, if you wish to stand as a candidate in the Senate election, the deposit is $2,000 and you need to get 4% of primary votes, which is impossible for most people. Legislative House of Representatives, it's $1,000, and that's just the deposit. On top of that, you've got campaign fees, and unless you've got a network of supporters, it's extremely difficult. But how do we make sense of the candidates and their policies? Well, it's quite easy if you use the concept of social progressive, economic progressive, social conservative and economic conservative. Now, all the candidates to a significant degree are a combination of these four major policies. Somebody who's socially conservative basically is against change as far as social mores are concerned, against gay marriage, against euthanasia, against abortion, and the list goes on and on. And obviously there are many people in the Parliament, currently the federal Parliament, who are social conservative. At the same time, we've got economic conservatives. What's an economic conservative? An economic conservative is somebody who believes in the neoliberal agenda. Corporatisation, globalisation, privatisation and deregulation. So that's the traditional Liberal National Party position. Well, it used to be socially conservative and economically conservative, but things have changed. There's moves afoot in the Liberal National Party to change that paradigm. And what we are now seeing is the evolution of a socially progressive element within the Liberal Party. Not in the Liberal Party itself, but in Liberal Party supporters, because what's happened to the Liberal Party and the National Party over the last 40 years is that the so-called wits, those people who are socially progressive, have been driven out of the party. But people in electorates that are traditionally Liberal National Party have continued to vote for the Liberal National Party, but now there's a grassroots revolt. And this is a revolt which has some financial resources behind it. And it's a revolt based on the concept of being socially progressive. So you've got independent candidates springing up in Liberal electorates, like Goldstein and Kooyong in Victoria and other parts of Australia, who are now launching campaigns directed at against the Liberal Party, trying to wrest the seat from the Liberal Party. Not relying on the Australian Labor Party, but relying on socially progressive elements within these traditional socially conservative areas changing. And these views are based on immigration policies, refugee policies, euthanasia policies, climate emergency policies, and these are the policies that these particular groups are now taking to the electorate, independent of the Liberal National Party. But they have something in common with the Liberal National Party, and that is they are economically conservative. They believe in the deregulation agenda, the corporatisation agenda, the globalisation agenda, the privatisation agenda. They believe in the private investment for private profit mantra. That is their DNA. These are seats that traditionally both the Greens and the Australian Labor Party would have difficulty ever winning because of the concentration of people with resources and wealth in these particular seats. There are deridedly described as the doctor's wives' seats. What that means is people who have got professional, stable incomes, who are part of the investment class, part of the 8% that has enough disposable income to be involved in investments in this country, who are sick and tired of the domination of the Liberal National Party by elements that are socially conservative, elements that don't want to face climate change, elements that don't want to do anything about the climate emergency, elements that don't want to change the refugee asylum seeker policies, the detention practices we have, elements that are against euthanasia, elements that are against abortion, elements which are against gay marriage equality, gay rights, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander rights, negotiations for a treaty. These are the socially progressives that have thrown their hat in the ring with financial support to destabilise the Liberal National Party and change the face of the Liberal National Party and win enough independence to be in a position to form a coalition government. So that's what we're seeing, is we're seeing a revolt in the Liberal National Party heartland, because the Liberal National Party is no longer a Liberal Party or a National Party. The National Party was traditionally agrarian socialists. They are now agribusiness supporters. The Liberal Party was traditionally, in many regards, socially progressive, but now it has been taken over by the conservative elements within the party. So we are seeing a grassroots revolt. The same grassroots revolt that happened in the ALP, the Australian Labor Party, traditional seats 20 years ago for the formation of the Australian Greens, but we'll look at that in a minute. So we've got these electorates where the Liberal National Party is fighting not just the ALP and the Greens, it's also fighting these new tribe of independents who agree with its economic policies, who agree with the private investment for private profit mantra, who agree with deregulation, privatisation, globalisation, corporatisation, who agree with the Fair Work Commission, and the list goes on and on, but who think that in the 21st century we should have policies which address the climate emergency, which address social issues. Now, within the ALP heartland, you've got the similar situation, but that situation has now reached an equilibrium. Because you'll find the great majority of Green voters, about 80%, always give their second preference to the Australian Labor Party. So although both the Liberal National Party and the ALP usually gather between 30 to 35% of primary votes, the majority of people who have voted in the past for the ALP, now some vote for the Greens, and some in city seats have now moved across to the Greens. Just a small number, one actually, and obviously there's 2 or 3 independents in federal parliament. So there's this battle. There's a battle in the ALP heartland between the social progressives. Now what the Green Party has been able to do is push the ALP into a more social progressive agenda. This is an agenda which accepts climate change, accepts the climate emergency, accepts the needs for social change and cultural change and legislative change as far as gays are concerned, as far as minorities are concerned, as far as transgender are concerned, and the list goes on and on. They accept that. So there's this battle. So there's 4 battles going on. There's a battle between the Greens and the Australian Labor Party, and there's a battle between the Liberal National Party and a more radical group of independents who are socially progressive. Now, as far as the Australian Labor Party is concerned, obviously it finds itself in a difficult situation. It found at the last election that even minor minor electoral reform means electoral defeat at the federal election. So what they've had to do is they have had to modify their policies in order to have an agenda which is no threat to the privatisation, globalisation, corporatisation, deregulation agenda which dominates activity, an agenda which doesn't actually threaten the 8% of Australians who have disposable income and are part of that investment class. So its policies are very broad, not specific, because they know that if they have specific policies, they will have major issues with the Australian media, which is dominated by both social conservatives, but to a more significant degree by economic conservatives. So the ALP is an economic conservative party. The Liberal Party is an economic conservative party. The National Party is an economic conservative party. The independents, which are springing up in Liberal held seats around the country, which are socially progressive, are also economically conservative. You'll find parties like Divided Nation and Palmer's party, you'll find that they have a mismatch of ideas but no real policies. Most of them are socially conservative, reactionary in many cases, but take on one or two economic initiatives which are of a more radical nature because of the nature of their support base, which doesn't look at the total picture. What they look at is the fact that their jobs are being taken by people from overseas that don't understand that the Liberal National Party is the greatest supporter of immigration we've seen in this country since Federation. And this constant battle between unionised labour and non-unionised labour continues, and it continues ad nauseum as the economically conservative sections of our society basically outlaw any significant union activity. We now have a ridiculous situation, as I've spoken of before. A member of the CFMEU has less legal rights than somebody who imports $1 billion worth of methamphetamine. We find the situation where you can't strike in this country outside an enterprise bargaining agreement period, and even during that period, even if they've got a majority of the voters and you want a 4-hour strike, you'll find the Fair Work Commission can get rid of it. We've got ridiculous laws which penalise unions. So we have this ridiculous situation that we're having a federal election. It's about socially progressive issues, and there's nobody really talking about changes to the economy. And that's why public interest before corporate interest was established. We are not only socially progressive, if you look at our policies, we are also economically progressive. We don't accept the private investment for private profit mantra. We don't accept privatisation of essential services. We don't accept that our natural resources should be developed by private organisations who pocket the profits at the expense of the people. We don't accept that over 1 million children from a population of 25 million live in poverty in this country. We don't accept that 1/3 of the Australian population has to survive on social security benefits, which in many cases are below the poverty line. We don't accept the current housing crisis. What we want to see is the development of a 3-tier economy, an economy based on private investment for private profit, an economy based on the expansion of nationalised essential assets. And as far as the mining sector, we'd like to see that nationalised without compensation to the major shareholders, because ultimately what is under the ground belongs to First Nations people and the rest of us, not a few corporations. We don't accept that you have to have 1 million children living in poverty in a resource-rich country like this. We don't accept deregulation. We think that regulation in significant areas is there to protect working people and protect the population from the more greedy, avarice sections of society. We don't accept the fact that people can be bankrupted, fines of $10,000 a day for being involved in workplace action. We don't accept many things, but it's based on, as I said, the development of a three-tier economy, one based on private investment for private profit, one on the nationalisation of essential services and national resources, and one based on the creation of cooperatives and collective. And as far as the rest of the population is concerned, especially that third living on social security benefits, we want to see the introduction of a universal basic income, which is paid to everybody. And if you earn more, say $50,000 a year, $1,000 a week. And how do you fund it? Very simply, by ensuring that the whole population pays tax, not just pay-as-you-earn taxpayers, by introducing a 1% stock market turnover tax, by introducing a 1% tax on transactions, financial transactions. You could raise at least $200 billion. And as we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic, when JobKeeper and JobSeeker was introduced, that the actual reactions to poverty had decreased. So there are changes possible within the current legislative framework. Now, unfortunately, the Liberal National Party and the Labor Party are so concerned about competition that they've recently passed legislation which means you need 1,500 members on the federal electoral roll in order to apply for registration as a federal political party. That means at least 60 to 70% of the current 45, 46 registered political parties will disappear off the ballot paper. That means new players will be heavily restricted and it'll become a gentleman's club. Federal elections will become a gentleman's club. That's why there's an increasing role for independents. And although we can't stand candidates under the public interest before corporate interest, we are seriously considering standing Senate candidates on a socially progressive and an economically progressive platform. So if you want more of the same, keep voting for the same people. Now, some people, I understand, won't vote. Some will vote informal as a protest, but that's not enough. It doesn't matter whether 10%, 20%, 30%, 50% vote or don't vote. What matters is that you are active. You may not agree with public interest before corporate interests, but if you don't agree with the current situation, which is dominated by socially progressive and economically conservative elements in society, then and socially conservative elements, I encourage you not only to join public interest before corporate interests or form your own organisations. Think about standing as an independent. Because we have a preferential system of voting, that means even if you get 1, 2, 3% of the vote, what that means is that you can actually determine the course of that election, because preference flows is what's critical. Whether it's in a traditional Liberal National Party seat, which has been attacked by socially progressive and economically conservative independents, or whether it's a traditional ALP seats which have been eroded by the Australian Greens, the key to change is the involvement of more people with a socially progressive and a economically progressive stand. So I encourage you, think about the next federal election. Think about it in those 4 terms: socially progressive, socially conservative, economically progressive, economically conservative. Make your decision based on that. And if you don't vote, and if you vote informal, I strongly suggest you start organising. Not voting or voting informally is not enough.